Hi there, it's great to see you. My name is Michael and I'm going to take you through the unboxing of what is one of the most anticipated cameras of 2018. The difference today, I'm going to take you through an unboxing from a video first perspective. Now, a lot of people have reviewed this camera from a stills perspective, comparing it to the Canon 5D Mark IV. I'm doing something different today. I'm concentrating on video first and, more importantly, mobile video first. So vlogging or potentially studio work a bit like this, where we set up the camera and shoot video. I'm sure it's a great camera for stills. I'm not interested in stills for this video. I'm only going to be looking at it from a video point of view. Let's get to the unboxing. Well, hang on, before we do that, I think it's important to look at this camera in and of itself, but also what it means for Canon as a company and the camera industry as a whole. We know that 2018 has been a landmark year, lots of mirrorless activity from lots of different manufacturers. Something is happening right now. And this camera here represents a changing of the guard. To get a better understanding of how important this camera is, we need to go back to the beginning of the year, 2018, January, and the rumors that were spreading that Canon was working on a full-frame mirrorless camera. The excitement was really strong and a number of people made predictions. Now it's September 2018. Let's see how many of those predictions came true. You probably already know. But we heard rumors early on. People were very excited about the potential for dual pixel autofocus in 4K. Have they given it to us? A lot of people who are more experienced in photography than me were talking about what they wanted from this camera. And they wanted a heft. They wanted a larger body, something that was substantial. They were a bit sick of these flimsy mirrorless cameras that have been released in the last few years. They wanted a full frame mirrorless camera and a bulk that took them back to older style cameras like this 600D from Canon, a DSLR that you could grip your hand fully around, and if you've got a big hand like mine, you feel strong in the grip and your fingers wouldn't cover up the lens because it was so small. They wanted a big, hefty camera just like this, but mirrorless and full frame. The other thing they wanted was dual pixel autofocus. Canon is famed for its dual pixel autofocus. It's a very hard phrase to say because it's unique to Canon and it's so good. And people were saying, oh, if you give us a camera that's got 4K dual pixel autofocus, we would be forever in your debt, Canon, forever yours. Well, have they given it to us? Yes, they have. So let's take a look. But before we do that, there's one more prediction, but it was a newer prediction. Back at the beginning of the year, people weren't talking about dual card slots. All of a sudden, with Canon's announcement, Nikon's announcement, dual card slots became this thing that everyone wanted, allegedly. Now, does everyone want dual card slots, or only those people on YouTube who are camera aficionados? There's something weird going on. There's a desire for higher engineering. I'm not so sure about the utility of it, but you know, we know that fear sells, and people were trying to scare consumers like you and me to say, oh, I wouldn't shoot a wedding with just one card slot. I wouldn't do that. But we know that people do. It's just not an issue. But Canon, if they had listened to people back in January, they've pretty much given them everything they asked for. This dual card slot thing kind of came out of nowhere for me. This is a strange time in Canon's history. I feel like Canon were pushed to make this camera by other challenger brands. So what does this mean for Canon? I think it's important at times like this to look at what is not being said and what is not being shown. And something happened around the release of this camera, which I'm going to talk about, that I think a lot of people missed. Just like they've missed the actual impact of video. Canon's a big company, an established company, and they release this product like a big company does. They took a number of influencers. I'm not sure what that word means exactly. I just know I'm probably not it right now. They took a number of influencers to Hawaii for the launch of this camera. Because these influencers are active on YouTube, Canon rightly assumed that they could reach a broader audience if they released this camera to that group of people. And then Canon blew it. When they flew these influencers to Hawaii, they spent the entire day, I don't know what they were doing. But by the time those YouTubers were able to give their impressions of the camera, it was say 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were definitely looking the worst. So Canon, this huge company, flies lots of people in at great expense to do a release of a camera, and then the people who are releasing it to the public talk about it at 4 in the morning, absolutely exhausted.
Doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm going to leave it right there. It's late. We want to get this video to you. Thank you very much for watching and understanding that I have a cold.
Is that how you release a camera in 2018?
I thought it was, oh, okay. I don't know what's going on. It's like really late. I don't know what I'm...
Yeah, it's 11:30 here in Hawaii, which means it's 5:30 a.m. at home. That's what our bodies think. We're tired.
Even before you hear what these people have to say, you can just look at them to see they're exhausted. It doesn't create a great impression of the camera. You're already persuaded not to purchase the camera, but I've done something different. I've purchased the camera. I've got one of the first Canon EOS R cameras in Australia. It's right here. Let's get to the unboxing. All right, first up, we got packages inside package. We've got a whole bunch of packages in here. We've got the standard manual. Got a couple of cables. But here comes the body. Look at that. And they've gone with a slightly different plastic to normal. Normally you get like a clear sort of plastic. I quite like this silver. It points to the future for me, and I think this camera might well be it. So let's pull it out and take a look at it. Oh yeah. Well, no real surprises there from Canon. It's a really obvious thing that you notice first up. Not too unusual for any of the Canon cameras, but often overlooked. People overlooked this. It's like an elephant in the room. But you've got to admire Canon for their amazing flip-out screens. They just work so well, and if only other companies could get that if you have a fully articulating screen, then you can video yourself. So I'm really happy with that feature. It's looking fantastic. We've got a small cursive R up in the top corner. That feels a little bit stuck on after the fact, but we'll forgive them for that. That's just a little bit of branding, and let's see how we perform. Hang on. There's more in this box, so let's see what else we've got. Oh, I forgot to mention, Canon, at the same time as releasing this amazing camera, have also released a number of lenses. So they've thrown in a free lens for me at the moment. It looks like the 28-70 lens. Looks pretty impressive. Let's take a look and see how it fits on the camera. Oh yeah. Look at the optics on this. I cannot wait to try it out. I think it's going to give an amazing kind of bokeh. Let me try and bring it up there, and I'll just hold it in front of this camera and see if we can create an effect. Camera, but let's take a look. How's that? Is that working? So I guess that proves that this lens will only work on the Canon EOS R. And what's even more impressive is it comes with an adapter. You just screw that on there and then stick it on your camera. And I think this is quite the vlogging camera. You can hold it up one-handed. You can hold it up one-handed. You got your flip-out screen that you can turn and watch yourself as you film yourself. And you can look at this little R that's sitting on the camera if you want, just to have something to look at if you don't want to look directly at the lens. I think it's really impressive, and Canon should be commended for what they've achieved. Looks like there's one more thing in the box here. Oh, hang on. This is not one of the new Canon lenses, but there's a kit in here that will help me turn it into one. Hang on. Yeah. That's much better. I can now make all sorts of adjustments just by turning this pen around the lens. Now there's one more thing in the box. It's a diffuser for the filter, so you can put that inside the adapter. Just turn the adapter and you can diffuse your light straight away, straight out of camera. And I just think it's fantastic because not only can you view yourself while you're filming yourself through this fully articulated screen, but if you're not looking the best, you can just blow your nose on it. Okay, so let's talk about some technical specifications of this camera. The weight of this camera comes in at 660 grams or 23 ounces. That's with the battery and the card included, not two cards, just one card. 660 grams, 23 ounces. The 5D Mark IV, that's the camera that everyone is comparing this camera to. The 5D Mark IV comes in at a whopping 890 grams. At 660 grams, the Canon EOS R is much lighter. Not only that, it's lighter than the Canon 80D. The 80D comes in at 730 grams. It's lighter than that. But I don't think we should be comparing the weight with the Canon 5D Mark IV. Everyone else has compared the two cameras to say, look, from a specification point of view, they're really, really similar. Just this one is mirrorless, different lens kit, but really similar to the 5D Mark IV. I believe that's the wrong camera to compare the EOS R to. The right camera to compare the EOS R to is cameras in the future. And one from the past, one that has been overlooked. And remember at this beginning of this video, I talked about the thing that was missing. In the press releases that Canon produced, because Canon is a big established company, they do press releases, they spoke about the Canon EOS R. They spoke about the optics of the new lenses. And at the same time, they did something else. They released a couple of other lenses. One of those lenses was the 32mm 1.4, is that what it was? 32mm EFM lens. And I found out about this lens because at the beginning of September, Canon released a ton of videos on their YouTube channel, all about the Canon EOS R, all about the new lenses for the R series cameras. And they also slipped in this video about the EFM 32mm lens. And this is how Rudy from Canon USA described this new EFM lens, hidden amongst all the other announcements from Canon. The EFM 32mm f1.4 STM can be used on any EOS M series camera, but its larger aperture and image quality really allow you to take full advantage of high-end M series cameras like the EOS M5 and M6. So what's missing from that list? The answer, and the obvious candidate for comparison with the EOS R series camera, the newly released in 2018 Canon M50, capable of 4K video, as you're seeing right now, because I'm shooting on the Canon EOS M50. And this, I believe, is the right camera to compare with the EOS R. It's a very lightweight camera, it shoots in 4K, has dual pixel autofocus in 1080p. It's the newest Canon mirrorless. I think that's something you want to compare a Canon to, is the previous Canon that came before it. And what do you learn from this? Well, you learn, what's the future of Canon? What will their next camera be that's mirrorless? And the other thing you learn is how much they've hidden this camera. Just as Rudy, describing this new lens, hid it behind the M5 and M6. And in that entire video, he does not mention the M50. It's the newest mirrorless camera. Doesn't mention it. Just the M5, just the M6. Older mirrorless cameras from Canon, but not their newer mirrorless camera, the M50. So it's buried in that video. And that video itself is buried underneath all the EOS R camera videos and the EOS R lens lineup. RF lenses, I think that's what they're called. You need to look at what is not being said. And when you do compare the EOS R with the Canon M50, you start to look at the future. You don't look at the past. In the past, at the beginning of the year when people were thinking about this new M series camera, they were thinking about, oh, I'd love that heft of a DSLR, because their mind was in the past. When we go to the future, I don't want a big camera. I don't think anyone wants a big camera. People say that it's more stable to have a big camera, but let's recount those numbers again. 660 grams for the camera body. The lens, the 24-70 lens, comes in at a whopping 1.4 kilograms. So you're looking at over 2 kilograms for this camera here, plus a tripod. I think that's ridiculous. It doesn't matter how steady your hand is around a larger grip. 2 kilos out in front of you, and it's being called the perfect vlogging camera? I don't think so. Now you can, admittedly, you can adapt older lenses to this new camera. You can stick on an adapter and you can put on, say, a 10 to 18mm lens. I think that comes in at about 400 grams, something like that. But it's not as fast a lens. If you're going to do that, why not just use, say, the Canon M50, shoot in 1080p if you don't want 4K, and you're done. It's almost exactly the same. So I'm really struggling to work out who this camera is for. If at that kind of weight, it's not going to be a camera that's mobile. You might set it up in a studio just like I've done with this shot here, but I'm not moving around. My focus is set to manual. I don't need an autofocus camera when I'm doing something like this. So what is it for? I suppose it's for those kind of studio shots where I might be moving backwards and forwards or moving around the set. But I think there are other ways to achieve that. And when I look at this camera here, I just think, if I needed to buy a camera now, would I buy this camera? Again, comparing it to the Canon M50, Canon M50 is under 1,000 Australian dollars. This new camera body alone is going to be upwards of $2,000–3,000. When I look to the future, I don't see this camera as being a main camera for anyone. I think in the next year and a half, there's going to be some phenomenal cameras coming out. And this one is just going to be a bridging camera, a point in time. I think this video that I'm making right now will date very quickly because I think this camera will age. So if I look ahead at the kind of cameras that I might see in 6 to 12 months, I think they're going to be a lot better than this one. They'll be better than the Canon M50, but I'll still be able to use this Canon M50 in 4K, locked off on a tripod. It can be my second camera. I don't need this to be my first camera. and I can't see it being my first camera. So the way Canon's gone about this, the way they've done their releases, even the way they've done their YouTube videos announcing this camera, seems very old-fashioned. The camera itself seems very old-fashioned in its styling. It reminds me a little bit of Homer Simpson, who designed a car for a car company, put all these features into it, and it was revealed, and people just went, oh my god. I think people will look back on this camera and see it as overly complex, not simple, and not good at any one thing in particular. But right now there's another camera company that we can learn from, and Canon can learn from. You see, we've been talking about mirrorless, we've been talking about DSLRs, but the action camera category might point to a future for mirrorless cameras. If we go back a couple of years in the action camera category, obviously there was one player, it was GoPro. But now that technology has proliferated, and although GoPros are very good, there are a lot more players in that market. It's become more of a commodity. And I think that's going to happen with mirrorless cameras. And I don't think that Canon can stand behind its moat of dual pixel autofocus or its color science. I think a lot of this technology is becoming cheaper and more accessible, and it's shrinking. So let's have a look at the GoPro market. Here I have an action camera. It could be a GoPro, it could be any other kind of brand. And for me, it doesn't matter if it's GoPro or it's not a GoPro. Is it doing the job? This one shoots in 4K, image stabilized. It's fantastic. And this is what's going to happen with mirrorless cameras. 4K will be a norm. Autofocus will be a norm. The lenses start to become very, very important with the mirrorless market. Right now, if we look at this 28 to 70 millimeter lens, I can't see it being used for vlogging, where you certainly can't hold something at that length with the crop factor on the 4K. There isn't a really good lens for vlogging. There just isn't in the Canon range. You've got the 10 to 18 mil, but the aperture's not that fantastic. It's also quite a bulky lens. And Canon are trying to tell us that they need to make lenses that are this big to get good image quality. But the lens you're looking through right now weighs just 85 grams. Do you like the quality of this lens? Do you like the quality of this 4K? I know I do. I think it's fantastic. Look, I'm not here to bag out Canon. I've gone on a Canon journey myself through this EOS KISS X5, otherwise known as the 600D or maybe the T3i. This camera was my first real video camera. As a DSLR, you had to focus before you hit record. Not much different to how I'm using the Canon M50 at the moment. And I'm of course using the Canon M50 right now. Will I get another Canon? Maybe, but I don't think it's going to be the Canon EOS R. Look, the ability to have dual pixel autofocus in 4K in the EOS R, that's fantastic. That's a game changer. That's one feature I would love to have in the Canon M50. But let's put this into perspective. I've already talked about how this camera isn't that good for being mobile. If the Canon M50 had dual pixel autofocus in 4K, fantastic. It's such a small camera, it's super mobile. That would be amazing. Look, I don't think the Canon M50 needs dual pixel autofocus in 4K. There's two ways around that. One is something that Canon would need to do, is to release a firmware update to make its autofocus in 4K effective. There's something defective about the autofocus in 4K on the M50. We know that Panasonic has released some firmware updates and their autofocus is amazingly improved for those cameras that had really poor autofocus using contrast detection. So now that those cameras are able to autofocus in contrast detection, and that's what is locked into the Canon M50 at 4K, if a firmware update was applied by Canon, I don't need dual pixel autofocus. I just need autofocus that works. There's another way to get around the dual pixel autofocus on the Canon M50 to have autofocus when you're vlogging in 4K. Alright, it's just before sunset. I'm shooting with the M50 in 4K and I've got a secret to reveal. I'm not using dual pixel autofocus. I'm not even using contrast detection, but I should be in focus. All around me should be in focus. And I've got this fantastic wide angle view. And here's the key. All the limitations that people put on this camera, they've put on this camera. When you actually use this camera, it's fantastic. I'm shooting in 4K. I've got this wide angle view. But there are some problems with this camera. And that's what I want to know about the EOS R. Firstly, this camera suffers from really terrible rolling shutter. Let's have a look. See that kind of jello effect? My head's kind of washing from side to side. That's from the rolling shutter. The other problem we have with this camera is electronic image stabilization. You can switch it on and it kind of works, but the quality of the image drops dramatically. Right now, image stabilization is switched off, electronic image stabilization is off. I should be really clear. The image should look great. It's pretty low light, but this camera is coping with it quite well. When I switch on electronic image stabilization and zoom in, you'll see a massive difference in the quality. I've now switched on electronic image stabilization. I've chosen the enhanced version of it, and it's cropped in a little bit, but that doesn't bother me. It's the quality of the image has deteriorated significantly with electronic image stabilization. Now, the EOS R also has electronic image stabilization. Is it the same? I believe it's the same chip, the DIGIC processor. So if it's related to hardware and the computational power of that chip, then we should expect the electronic image stabilization to create a similar grainy kind of image and the rolling shutter to be similar as well. See that kind of jello effect? My head's... I've disabled electronic image stabilization. I just want to show you what happens when I change the aperture to fully open on this lens. Bearing in mind that people are complaining that this crop sensor is light sensitive. I've got my ISO at 100 and I'm just going to open up my shutter, well, open up my aperture completely. And right now I should be blown out just to show you what is possible with this camera. All the footage I've shot here, I've used a focal length. Now I'm going to set that to infinity and we'll see what I look like and what the background looks like with it set to infinity. So that's at infinity focus. You know, I think I'm looking pretty clear or clear enough, and the background should look fantastic as well. How's that? I think it's doing the job. If you like what you've seen out of the Canon M50, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because in my next video, I'm going into greater detail on how you can use the M50 for fantastic video in 4K. Look, I'm hoping today you've learnt that the M50 is great for this kind of work where I'm talking directly to camera, but it's not going to be effective for sport where you've got really rapidly moving subjects because it introduces the rolling shutter. And I want to know if the EOS R is similar.